If you are looking to build a freeze-drying business that is unique, that's built around creative products that are beyond just freeze-drying candy, freeze-drying ice cream, and freeze-drying fruit, you're gonna wanna stick around and watch this video because I'm gonna be interviewing the owner of a freeze-drying manufacturer who has built machines that are built to design very unique products and scale at large. Now, this series is focused on companies who are in the freeze-drying space, whether they're equipment, supplies, or they're owners of a unique freeze-drying company. Now, today we're going to be interviewing Richard Delong, who is the owner and founder of NutriFreeze, as well as two other companies, Botanique Preservation, freeze-drying flowers, as well as CannaFreeze, which is freeze-drying cannabis and hemp. Now, we're going to be interviewing him and talking about his different freeze dryers, his whole background. Is really interesting, just given he's had over 30 years experience doing this. Now, if you don't have time to watch the entire hour-long interview, go ahead and drop to the video description. I've got a couple timestamps of different topics. I'm also going to be introducing some different segments in other future videos related to those topics, so be on the lookout for that. Now, let's go ahead and get to the interview and see what NutriFreeze, Botanique Preservation, and CannaFreeze is all about. Rich, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your company and your background?
I'm Rich Delong. I started a freeze-drying business in 1988 in Iowa. I purchased a bowling alley that had several businesses in it that had one after another gone bankrupt. And so I purchased it on April 1st of 1988. And when we moved that business to Arizona, we actually incorporated it here in Arizona also on April 1st. Not exactly sure what that really means. But we were really the first company in the United States to freeze dry flowers on a really large scale for distribution to florists, craftspeople, interior decorators. And in Iowa, we were running 10 large freeze dryers, freeze drying about 960,000 roses a year and 100 other types of items. And we had some pretty tough winters back there. And my wife at the time came into my office one morning and she said, I'm moving to the Sun Belt. You can either come or stay. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about this over lunch. And so she had a sister and brother in Phoenix, and it really made sense for us to move to a really nice dry climate since we're in the freeze-dried flower business and you want to keep everything really dry after it's freeze-dried. And so we moved here in 94. The parent company that we have is Botanique Preservation Equipment Incorporated. That has not changed, but we also have added a couple of trade names, CannaFreeze and NutriFreeze, and Nutra with an I, NutriFreeze. And in the cannabis industry and hemp industries, we have 8 models of machines. And in the food industry, NutriFreeze, again, we have 8 models of machines. First company, Botanique Preservation, that company has always concentrated their efforts in freeze-drying flowers. And over the course of 30 years, I ran 325 training classes for people from around the world and basically trained the entire industry. We still have a Botanique distributing equipment into the florist industry. And we have 3 models of machines that we distribute into the florist industry. I have a young man that actually takes care of marketing, sales, training, takes care of all of that for me so that I can concentrate on CannaFreeze and NutriFreeze at this time.
Oh, awesome. Now, let me just kind of ask you some questions about this Botanique line. So for those who aren't familiar with freeze-drying flowers, has that been around in terms of people using it as a business? Like, how long has it been around, and what are some of the advantages for freeze-drying flowers too?
Most of the people that are involved in freeze-drying flowers are actually freeze-drying what we would consider memory flowers, bridal bouquets, sympathy flowers, maybe anniversary flowers. Okay. But really and truly predominantly wedding flowers that go into shadow boxes or bubble frames. You know, it's like any industry. If you ask, is it profitable? It really depends on how you run the business. In the past, I've sold freeze dryers to people who really did nothing. And then we've sold freeze dryers to people who, even on a part-time basis, crank out 100,000 plus gross a year.
Holy
So,
cow.
yeah. So if someone came to me and said, "Can you guarantee me that I'll be profitable in the freeze-dried flower business?" I would say, "No, that's up to you. It's
Yeah.
it's all on you."
Yeah, and that's something I actually did a video. And for those who haven't watched that video, I did the truth video. I just said, is it, can you make money with a freeze dryer? And I said, yes, you can. And I showed some calculations. If you haven't watched the video, for those who are watching, but I showed some calculations of just, here's your cost of goods sold, and then here's what you're kind of left over with. But the rest of it is really indicative of how you're going to run your business. How are you going to pay yourself? Are you going to pay yourself? Are you going to, how are you going to calculate your power? Power is different. Electricity is different for everybody. What type of packaging are you going to do? So when people say, is it a profitable business? I think it is, but I've worked 3 years to make sure that it is, and it's sustainable for a side hustle like I do while having a full-time job. And so, and I just like asking if it's profitable. It seems like it is.
It can
now, yeah, it can be, and it just depends on how you dedicate yourself to understanding the business and where you can make better margins by common things that you would need to know with running a business. So that's awesome.
I have one client that at one time offered over 600 choices in the way of bubble frames, shadow boxes, glass domes, glass boxes. He has narrowed it down to 2 sizes of shadow boxes, and he's making money now.
Yeah, I
sometimes it's just keep it simple.
Yep. I talk about that too. I say that one of the things that can really help you understand the business is, yes, there's a lot of things to freeze dry with food and fruit and vegetables and even some ice cream, as well as these candies that are very trendy. But, sometimes less is more, and you can have a lot of SKUs. Well, a lot of different candies means you have to package all of those. You have to have different labels for all those. You have to have storage for all of those. You have to have time in your freeze dryer to do those. And if you have any, decent lead time from people buying it from you, you want to deliver on time and when they want it. And I just think less is more sometimes, and just really knowing how to do something very well and then starting to build up the product line. So, wow, 600 types of flower cases and just down to 2 now, huh?
Yeah,
That's
down to
awesome.
2. And now
Interesting.
he's making really good money because he just totally streamlined his business.
Yeah. And I can see, I can see that too with preservation of flowers that are more sentimental, because my wife did that for her wedding dress. It was preserved with a dry cleaning place, preserved very well, and it's in a box, and it's basically stored for decades if she wants to. And we don't have any daughters, unfortunately. We got 2 boys, but if we did, maybe she wanted to pass that down or whatever. But preserving that is something that it's not for everybody, but it is for some people who want that sentimental side of things. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So talk about the other line. You said cannabis and hemp. And I actually researched this a couple of years ago when I was starting out. I kind of saw your website a little bit. Tell me about that particular line, and what kind of things have you done that's made this kind of an accelerating kind of growth opportunity?
Well, we had a tremendous amount of experience freeze-drying botanicals before we decided to enter the cannabis industry with freeze dryers. At the same time, we didn't know everything about cannabis. And in fact, even today, there's more and more information coming out about the chemical makeup of cannabis and what those chemicals are capable of doing, for instance, in the medical industry. But right away, we found that people wanted to preserve terpenes, fragrances, and some of these terpenes are really, really volatile. So
What do you mean
we
by that? What do you mean by volatile?
so so in the cannabis industry, you really have to control time, temperature, and vacuum. Most of the freeze dryers, in fact, maybe all of the freeze dryers that are sold, for instance, by Harvest Right, because you're using Harvest Right equipment, um, they don't have vacuum controls on them. And if you don't have a vacuum control kit installed on a freeze dryer, you wouldn't be able to use it successfully in the cannabis industry because everything that you're trying to save in the way of taste and fragrance is just going to get vaporized off.
Hmm.
And you're going to end up at the end of the load with grass, and you might as well just go out in your yard and pick up a handful of grass out of your yard because all the good stuff is going to be vaporized off. So we never go above 70 degrees. In fact, we stay under 70 degrees when we're freeze drying cannabis or hemp. And we also don't use really deep vacuums. We actually don't, publish what we're doing because over the last several years, we've developed algorithms for running cannabis and hemp that make our clients very successful. And it's taken a lot of work, a lot of effort to develop the algorithm. So
For
we
sure.
just don't just publish them, but we do share them with clients that purchase equipment from us. And the majority of the equipment that we sell into the cannabis industry, in fact, all the machines except for two small machines, all have computers on them. And when we go out on site to commission a machine, I not only train at least two people from their business, but I also key in algorithms for them to go ahead and run their equipment. Now
Wow.
they can change those algorithms if they want to, and with a Cat5 data cable, they can communicate with me directly in my office or with the factory that builds to my specifications.
Could you share a little bit about, what's the difference between, because with hemp and cannabis, you do dry it
Right.
for sale, but what's the difference between freeze drying it and just having it more dried like it's available now at a dispensary, things like that?
Well, the majority of the product in the United States, I'm going to say 99.9% or more of the product in the United States is still simply air dried by hanging it in a room where they're controlling temperature and humidity. And it's air dried for anywhere from 10 to 30 days. Really depends on a lot of different factors. And sometimes one of the factors, of course, is the size of the product. And so while it's hanging there, if you walk into one of those drying rooms, why the fragrance just about knocks you over. And why is that? That's because the terpenes that cause that fragrance are actually deteriorating and they're actually vaporizing off.
Hmm.
And so one of the reasons that people hang their product for so long is because they're trying to get rid of the grassy taste, the chlorophyll out of the product. And what happens is the enzymes that break down the chlorophyll are actually deteriorating as the product is hanging there. And so it takes a really long time sometimes for that grassy taste to go away.
Hmm.
When we freeze dry the product, we're now freeze drying product in 24 to 36 hours, and sometimes even less. And during the freeze drying process, the enzymes that break down the chlorophyll remain 100% viable. And at the end of the drying cycle, when that product is unloaded into an oxygen-rich atmosphere, the enzymes go to town, and within a matter of just a few hours, the grassy taste is totally gone. We've
Wow.
unloaded loads of product, and an hour later, people who are very knowledgeable about the cannabis industry are smoking the product, and there's no grassy taste. Product doesn't shrink, has great color, no browning, no yellowing, smokes super smooth, no grassy taste. What more could you ask for? There's no shrinkage. Product looks fresh. And people talk about the fragrance, for instance. And the fragrance is not a decaying fragrance where it's been hanging for 10 to 30 days. It's not that decaying fragrance. So when you're smoking it, it's a live resin fragrance. It's the same fragrance as the live plant growing in the facility.
Very interesting. Yeah, I personally don't smoke, but I can see how what you're describing would make a very fresh product versus, that long drying period kind of maybe just kind of removes that fresh type of activity that you might want, and that probably the taste and the smell and just the overall experience is way different. Rich, what would you say has been the growth in this type of particular industry? Not necessarily your sales per se, but just how many people are getting into this because you have the type of freeze dryer for this. How many people would you say are doing this right now? Is it something that is barely even tapped into, or is it maturing?
It's still a real minority of the businesses. A lot of people think that they're doing everything absolutely perfectly, and they don't want to change. And the people that are actually doing the work of growing the product, post-treating, post-harvesting the product, and all of the people that are really doing the labor feel that their product is perfect and they don't necessarily want to change. But the people that own the premises sometimes, the actual investors, are interested in automating. They have to automate. They absolutely have to automate. When you're actually shipping over 20 tons of finished product a year, you can't be hand trimming that product. You can't be hanging it in these massive growing rooms. All of your profits are just getting eaten up. We recommend cryo trimming, which is very fast, using carbon dioxide, and basically just flash freezing the little sugar leaves and tumbling the product gently for a minute, and it looks almost hand trimmed. Almost. Just a tiny bit of work and it's done. Cryo trim it, can go directly into bags and in a freezer. When the freeze dryer is available, move it into the freeze dryer, and it really automates everything.
That's great. Yeah. So the business is taken off. How many people would you say are doing this right now? Is that something that you can reveal to us?
Well, I don't know what my competition is doing, but I'm going to say that we're still way over 90% of the product is being air dried. A lot of opportunity, and we're tapping into that on a daily basis.
Where can people find out more about the cannabis hemp particular machine? What's the name of the company?
You can view our website at CannaFreeze.net.
Okay.
CannaFreeze.net.
It's actually right behind Rich right there on that banner. So CannaFreeze.
I'm not sure what we're hiding.
No, that's great. Well, I think we could probably do a whole segment on each one of yours, but let's maybe get to the NutriFreeze.
Hey, I wanted to cut out of the interview real quick to ask you to do two things. One, hit the like button on this video if you feel the content in the interview is good so far, it's informative, providing good information. Now, number two is to comment in this video, because I'd love to know if there's other questions that you think I should have asked, or maybe just spurred some interest into other topics that you want me to ask in the future, because I'm planning on interviewing Richard in the future for all these 3 different companies that he's been talking about, and just his knowledge of the freeze drying space. Again, if you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe bell, and that way you get notified of future videos that I produce out on the Creative Freeze Drying series. Let's get back to the interview.
Side of things, because a lot of us who have been in buying some Harvest Right freeze dryers, Harvest Right is definitely the name out there right now. Just they are really cranking out a lot of machines, but there is a lot of competition coming in. I personally purchased recently the Stay Fresh freeze dryer. It's got some new technology of drying and sensors and things like that. But it's definitely taking off. A lot of people freeze drying candy, a lot of people doing cottage food type of side businesses, or even full time. And even people are getting much larger operations. And so I wanted to ask you, tell us about NutriFreeze, and
Okay.
specifically, maybe, what is the difference in what sets you apart in terms of what your freeze dryers have to offer versus what is very accessible on the home freeze dryer side, like harvest rate?
Well, we just placed a couple of units with people who had multiple harvest rates. Really and truly, there's kind of a point at which, if your business is truly taking off and growing, you could end up with 10 harvest rates or 16 harvest rates. And
Yes.
that really means is you have 16 vacuum pumps to think about, and 16 sets of electronic controls to think about, and so you have a lot of things that can fail. Really, a lot of things that can fail. Um, we really believe that there's three kinds of freeze dryers out there. There's freeze dryers that are manufactured for home use, and in your particular case, it's being used for a small business. Um, and then there's commercial freeze dryers, and then there's industrial, and we're industrial. At this moment in time, everything we sell is industrial. And I know you've looked at our websites, and one of our machines that's fairly small is $50,000. And why is that? Why is it not $5,000? And it's because it's super industrial. It's meant to be used 24/7, 365. We've been placing freeze dryers now in the cannabis and food industry since 2019, industrial freeze dryer since 2019, and we've had one issue where we had to send a tech out. Only one.
Wow. That's impressive because as many people who are probably watching this or will watch it in the future, that is definitely something that's happening. The issues with the vacuum pumps and the mechanical parts of the harvest right is definitely something that's deterring people, but also it's just something that we're all, if we have harvest rights like me, we're kind of just dealing with it. Sometimes we get lucky and the machine is running very smoothly and there's very minimal types of fixes to be done. But other people have had it very common. And I draw it back to more of like a company that really has blown up exponentially in a very quick amount of years. And the quality control just isn't what they're able to manage for how many they're trying to get out into the consumer space. And so I just recognize that that's a company like Harvest Right who is very quickly developing products and just pushing them out the door. And the quality control has been impacted by that type of speed. And so the mechanical parts and things like that just isn't what it probably was when they first started, where, they could definitely make sure every single one was going out right. And so I think that's where competition comes in, and now you have choices and things like that. So it's nice to hear that you have a very, very low rate of mechanical issues.
I have a company in Europe that builds everything to my specs. And the owner of that company many years ago came to the conclusion that it's way better to overbuild and have zero issues in the field than it is to try to cut corners and try to compete with everybody on price and then have issues in the field. And so our warranty issues are nil.
Yeah, and what is your warranty on a freeze dry machine?
It's 1 year parts and labor. But the other thing is, we never run and hide. I'm here and I take calls all day long. I'm working with people that have been clients of mine in the floral industry for well over 20 years. And so we always do our very best to make sure that people are successful and that they don't have issues.
Okay.
There's always going to be issues. If you have a machine for 20 plus years, there's going to be issues. But we try to help people work through those.
Now, NSF is kind of a standard for, stainless steel, like commercial grade industrial type of equipment. Is your equipment like certified in that type of sense, where that type of NSF type of certification is good for FDA? Like if someone, very, very few of my audience right now as it stands is probably in that space, but it's probably good to know in terms of the FDA wanting that type of equipment in your kitchen.
So everything that a product can touch, the specimen chamber, the shelving, the trays, is all 304 stainless steel, food grade stainless steel. Now, if someone is going to do something that we know is medical, and we talk about this right up front with everybody, if you're doing something that's actually medical grade, then the trays that we provide are 316 stainless, so they're pharmaceutical grade. We don't even charge extra for it. We just take care of it. One of the reasons that our equipment is more expensive is with most of the home freeze dryers that are out there. In fact, I think everything, and we research continually. We research. And there's a half dozen companies that are coming online right now to compete with Harvest Right. Because they see that market, and it's a really big market, and so there's at least 6 companies that we're aware of that are coming online within the next few months that are going to compete with Harvest Right. We're not going to be in that market with industrial freeze dryers. They're using electric heating pads to set the trays on. And what we're doing is we're using stainless steel shelves that are welded in place that have hollow grooves in them. And we're forcing liquid silicone through those hollow shelves at a very high velocity so that we have less than 1 degree C difference in temperature anywhere on the shelf.
Wow.
It costs a lot of money. It's a lot. Between building that and putting a heating pad in place, it's a big difference, a huge difference.
I would like you to expand on that, because it actually drew from a question I had prepared for you, which is, is there kind of a standard for the drying process within freeze drying in your experience? Because people who own a freeze dryer like me, who just are getting into it 3 years ago, who own a freeze dryer like Harvest Right, we're just, there's a lot of like myths and kind of perceptions out there in terms of if the freeze drying process is, if there's a standard for freeze drying, or are we just supposed to press start and let the Harvest Right freeze dryer run? And as long as it has low moisture content with a moisture meter, or if it seems dry through some testing, it's good to go. Is there kind of a standard, and is your method the right way? How do we know that?
Well, there's actually machines that are more sophisticated than what we sell. In the pharmaceutical industry, there are companies that have been out there since the 1960s, and they've developed incredibly sophisticated pieces of equipment. In the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, it's extremely necessary to process using recipes that are tried and true, and you can't deviate from it, or it might destroy an entire load of medicine, for instance. The company that builds for us also builds pharmaceutical. And a lot of that really sophisticated technology isn't being used down the chain, for instance, necessarily in food or floral or taxidermy or in other industries, because it's not necessary. And it's really expensive. And so people do ask, is there something that's more sophisticated, or are people developing newer techniques and, for freeze drying? It's all been developed. Believe me, it's all developed. It's just costly. And so you don't see it in a Harvest Dry. You don't see it in a Harvest Dry anywhere close to the technology that's in a pharmaceutical machine. And it's because of cost.
Yeah. So when it comes to food, when it comes to NutriFreeze, your industrial type grade of a freeze dryer. Sure. Now I noticed that you have kind of the same capacity as a large Harvest Right freeze dryer. And I know that I can do 12 to 14 pounds of product in about 36 hours, sometimes longer, depending on the heat in the area that I'm in. And yours is about the same, maybe 24 to 36 hours is what you say. So for someone who would want to look into your freeze dryers, what are those things that they need to check off in their business to say, I need to pursue these type of freeze dryers that are more costly? You are significantly higher than Harvest Dry, but what type of boxes does someone need to check to say NutriFreeze is the type of freeze dryer I need to start looking at?
Okay. The two smaller freeze dryers that we have are really designed to go into research labs. For a company that's involved in the food industry, and they need a research unit for a whole new line of product that they're developing. And so that's what those two small units are. The least expensive is $50,000. And you're absolutely correct. It doesn't have a lot of production potential, but it doesn't need to because it's being built as a research unit. So I wouldn't expect any of your clientele to even consider buying that unit. Now, our model FC 12.5 is a really nice unit that you can move from several harvest rights into that unit, and you can run it 24/7, 365, and it has good production capabilities.
And what's the cost of that one as it stands today in 2023?
Yeah, so I don't have everything memorized, so I'm going to.
It's perfectly fine. I just know, 5 years from now, somebody's going to look it up, and I don't want them to say like, well, you said this then, but in 2023, what could someone purchase that for?
So we're at 85,500 plus crating, custom crating, and shipping, normally ocean from our factory in England. Okay. And we have a factory, like I say, that builds to my specs. This unit I helped design from the ground up. It's very, very new to us. And we designed this machine for one customer, but it's going to be a great machine for a lot of other customers. But we designed it for one customer in Detroit, and this is the size he wanted, and we made it happen. We're at 85.5.
Okay.
It has tremendous capabilities. It has the hollow shelves that are welded in place, high velocity silicone flowing through them. This particular unit does not have a computer screen on the side of it, but it has some pretty sophisticated controls with 4 temperature probes that go directly into the product.
Okay. So you said this is for someone who needs to research developing a product.
The 12.5 is something that a lot of people are going to purchase. The smaller units that we refer to as multi-dryers are just research units.
Okay.
But the 12.5 is a terrific unit, and if you have a few harvest rights and you're having issues, you're not going to have an issue with the 12.5. It's just going to sit there and run day after day after day.
And that 12.5 was the 85?
85.5, exactly. And then from that point, we actually double in size to our model FC 25, from a 12.5 to a 25. And on a 25, you can put 55 pounds of product in it and freeze dry it in really 16 to 24 hours. We claim 24 to 36. We really don't know what you're going to put in it. And so we're going to say 24 to 36, but with food, you're going to be 16 to 24 hours. And then we go up in size, and as you're very aware of, from that point, we go up using conductive heat energy. We go up in size using radiant heat energy. And we go up to some really big boys. The largest unit that we would typically place does 1,100 pounds in 24 to 36 hours. Wow. Really 16 to 24, 1,100 pounds of food. Now, that's our FCR 500. Right now at the factory, we're building 3 FCR 1,500s, which will do 3,300 pounds of food every 16 to 24 hours. Wow. So if you want to scale up from your 250 harvest rights, I mean, really and truly, it's a whole different ball game. But this is the 3 that we're building right now are for very large companies that manufacture dog food.
And I would probably say, for those of you who, heard a 85.5 type of price, 85,500, and you're looking at it, for those of everyone who's watching who has 12, 15, maybe even 20 Harvest Right freeze dryers, that does seem like a lot, but think about how much time you're spending coordinating the production of those freeze dryers, maintenance of all those pumps, changing oils, making sure the error messages are fixed, making sure you're changing out all the trays, all of that. It's kind of like me. I hand stamp my bags right now that I do my product, right? I haven't reached the threshold yet to have them printed for me. Because I know I can do it really quickly, and the money that I would save hasn't quite equated to the time I would save. I think that is different when it comes to, I know personally with 3 freeze dryers, how much time I'm spending washing trays, the error messages, all of those different things. And it could save a lot of people a lot of money. I think it's maybe the 1 or 2% of freeze dryers right now, freeze dry businesses. But man, take a look at NutriFreeze if you are not, if you are kind of in this placement, because it will at least take your interest of seeing where the payback would come and breaking even. And Rich, I've even known when I looked at your Botanique freeze dryers back when I was first researching in 2019, 2020, is you actually do have a calculator to show the profitability and the kind of the break evens of those things. So I think your company would really help understand when that profitability would come, or that break even after purchasing one of your dryers. Well, hey, go ahead.
We just did a show. We just did a show back in Oklahoma, and it was a cannabis show. And we sell an FC 12.5 into the cannabis industry also. And we had a gentleman come by our booth. He has 16 harvest rights, and he's doing edibles in the cannabis industry. And I just said to him, how many are actually running at this point in time? He goes, 8. So he has half of them that are actually. And and as we were packing up to leave, he came by our booth and said, write me up for a 12.5.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's a knock on Harvest Right, because I think you're right when you said a little bit a while ago that there's 3 types of freeze dryers. I think the home freeze dryer is what Harvest Right is focusing on, but there's a lot of people that are like me who are getting it and making it into a business. And there's a certain amount of, threshold that you got to decide, what's your capacity for dealing with troubleshooting machines and maintenance. And look at that, that guy has 50% of his machines stopped right now, like dealing with production issues. That's just a lot to deal with. And I can see why he wanted you to write up an order. Let's,
and we're really not out there to knock competition at all. And Harvest Right obviously has been very successful. Sold, thousands, tens of thousands probably of small freeze dryers.
I agree.
So they've been very successful. I think what you said about the number of machines that they're actually shoving out the door compared to early on probably has some credence. I didn't say it, you said it.
Yeah, well, I studied business. I kind of see how it goes. So I'm fine with that. But I own Harvest Right, and I'm an affiliate of Harvest Right. So I do promote that people buy that if they're starting out as a freeze dried business. It's just kind of probably that 1 to 2% that are needing to upgrade to something like you, that it makes a lot more sense.
Thank you.
I've got a couple more questions, Rich, and then we'll wrap up this one. And for those of you watching, I think you're going to really like these next couple of questions to continue watching this video. But Rich, could you tell us, in your experience of this freeze drying industry, is there a proper way to store freeze dried food? And especially if there's any tips you have that you've seen from some of your customers, how do you properly store freeze dried product to eventually bag, but also what's the proper way to store it for a 1 to 2 year kind of consumption period. That's where a lot of us are at, is we do shows or we need to store product for the holidays coming up later this year. Do you have any insight that you'd like to share with us that could help us?
We know a lot about freeze drying, but packaging is really not our wheelhouse. But over the years, I have seen that if you're storing bulk food, you can use 5-gallon buckets. And I saw that you do that. Use 5-gallon buckets with the special screw-off lid that has a rubber seal in it.
That's what I use. Yeah.
I believe you're also using oxygen scrubbers. What I would be tempted to do if I were going to store it for very long is possibly use the same kind of bucket, maybe a 5-gallon bucket with that special lid that screws on with a nice seal. But I probably would actually flood the bucket with nitrogen gas, and then go ahead and screw the lid on really tight. That way, you know that you can store it really for a long period of time, and you really and truly don't need to even worry about oxygen scrubbers at that point.
Now, what happens if I unscrew the lid and need to package it, but I only package half of what's in the bucket? Can I just refill it and do the nitrogen again? Or would it ruin the product?
No, you certainly could do that. I saw that being done in LDS community, at the large food banks that the Mormon community has, the LDS community. They definitely use nitrogen to top off the 5-gallon buckets. And normally they're just hammering a lid on to the 5-gallon bucket for storage, or 3-gallon or whatever size bucket.
Yeah, I personally, that's a good point. I think the storage, I've nailed down. It's in terms of the bags individually. A lot of what's being purchased is ones that have windows, because visually, marketing wise, you can see the product and things like that. And it sells well. But the shelf life of that is very low, especially in very dry, humid climates. There's a lot of, especially humid, there's just a lot of chances that oxygen can get in through the window and the type of thickness of the bag. And so I've kind of found a sweet spot for my shelf life of my craft Mylar bags. Well, they're not Mylar, they're just craft bags. But basically, I think that's a kind of a thing that I think everyone's trying to figure out, is what's the best way for short-term storage of the packaging versus storing the bulk product. But I think I've got it right, that according to what your experience is. So yeah. And if you want to buy, some of those lids, I've got some links in this video description if you want to buy some of the buckets with the Gamma Seal lids that have that rubber seal. Hey, Rich, could you give us also, is there any mistakes that you've seen from some people who have even bought your freeze dryers, or you've met at different conferences? Like, what's a common pitfall that people maybe should try to avoid, or that you've seen that we could kind of learn from your experience on? And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to, specifically freeze drying cannabis or freeze drying flowers, things like that, but just for the business of freeze drying, what's one thing that we could learn from your experience
over the years is, can I run this business out of my garage? And I'm sure you've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Run this business out of my garage. Well, the thing is, a freeze dryer really is a piece of laboratory equipment, really and truly. Even the Harvest Rights, commercial freeze dryers, our industrial freeze dryers, they're laboratory piece of equipment. Even the biggest machines that we have, laboratory equipment. So when people are just entering the industry and they say, can I run this out of my garage? I think you need to ask, is your garage insulated, sheetrocked? Is it climate controlled? Is it heated and air conditioned? And if it's in some areas, like let's say across the deep southeast, do you have a dehumidifier? And because you really need to put that freeze dryer in a climate controlled facility. And
yes.
So that'd be like the first thing I would say is find out where's this machine going to be? Is it going to be in the kitchen? Is it going to be in a garage?
Yeah.
Yeah, where's it going to be? The other thing that just fails in the freeze-dried industry, if it's not taken care of properly, is the vacuum pump. And so sometimes we in the florist industry and a lot of the older machines that are out there in the florist industry, we just hear from people and it's like, yeah, we hate vacuum pumps because they've been out there for a really long time. Even really high quality vacuum pumps like from Welsh or Edwards or Leibold or Pfeiffer, really high quality vacuum pumps need to be taken care of. I tell people, you take care of that vacuum pump like it was your baby. Check it every single day. Check the clarity of the oil. If the oil is milky, it needs to be changed. If the oil's rusty, it needs to be changed. Probably need to flush that pump if the oil looks the least bit rusty, for instance. But that's one of the fail points is people just not taking care of a vacuum pump.
Oh, that's great.
Vacuum pumps in your industry, I think, have mist filters on them. I don't think most people vent the vacuum pump to the exterior of the building. And so you have mist filters. Well, mist filters are there, of course, for a reason, to catch any oil mist that comes off of the pump. And mist filters are going to need to be drained on a regular basis. And if you start smelling oil, then the filter that's inside of the mist filter element needs to be changed. But, those are a couple of things that I see is where are you going to put this and how are you going to take care of it?
Yep. And the Harvest Stripe, for a lot of us, we have a premium pump, which has that mister on it. And now they say that you can go about 20 to 30 cycles running that without having to change the oil. I do believe that if you're doing candy, if you're doing something more longer cycle like fruit and things like that that's taking longer than 24 hours, you probably need to shorten that about half, change it out every maybe 5 to 10 cycles. But yeah, I can also see why having larger and larger freeze dryers and a smaller amount of them can really benefit. So you're not having to do all these changes, right?
Exactly.
But great advice. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think just my last question that I've been asking in this series to talking with freeze drying business is, where do you see the freeze drying industry headed? You're obviously very entrepreneurial and innovative. You have 3 different types of freeze drying kind of sectors, but have you, in all your experience, is this industry like craze and this trend of a lot of people getting into it? Is this exciting? And what are you looking forward to? And what do you think is going to happen to the freeze drying industry in the United States specifically?
Well, in freeze-dried candy, for instance, there's a lot of people in it, like yourself, that have 1 or more machines, and normally small machines, and doing a really nice job, nice packaging. Everything's really, really terrific. Recently, the company in Europe that builds for me sold an FC50 and an FC100 for candy. So this is a lot of candy. This is a tremendous amount of candy.
So they sold an 1,100 pound one and a 3,000.
They sold the largest one was a FC100, and an FC100 will process a minimum of 220 pounds of candy per run, and that's going to be twice a day. They're going to run it twice a day, so they're going to do 440 pounds minimum of candy per day with that unit. So here's what I see happening. I see these large companies like Frito-Lay or Mars or some of these other companies that are watching all this happen coming to us and saying, we want to buy some of your really big industrial equipment. And they're going to flood the market, and you're going to walk into every supermarket and every little mini market in the United States, and their product is going to be there.
Yep.
and they're going to try their best to put you out of business.
Well, yeah, it's definitely not the hope that everyone wants to, or the words that nobody wants to hear. But I think it's on the tip of everybody who's smart enough to understand that these large companies, people like me who are buying Skittles, who are buying some of these brand name candies, it's great business for them because they're selling a ton of product, but they're wondering why. But that was several years ago. They now know why they're seeing this increase in sales, and they are going to do that. And I think people would be stupid to not know that.
Yeah.
And they are going to do that. And that's why this interview, this type of channel exists, because I want to provide opportunities for people to think beyond just the candy. Candy is fun. I think people will still be able to sell to your small local boutique shops that want to sell local freeze-dried candy, or someone who makes the candy who's local. I think you're always going to have that. But for someone who wants to get into a wholesale distributor who is local or maybe is regional, and you have that contract right now, you are probably going to get squeezed out eventually. And so you need to pivot and think about what's the long-term play here within probably the next 2 to 3 years. And I think it's going to come from finding your specific niche, finding your target audience, getting into cannabis, getting into some larger fruit making, getting into building a recipe that's unique using freeze-dried types of products. I think everyone needs to think about that. And so I think that's great that you bring it to the attention. It may not be the words that everyone wants to hear, but don't go crazy buying a bunch of freeze dryers if you don't have a good business strategy. To also, now you're going to have a lot of equipment and you're dependent on freeze drying Skittles. Mars Wrigley is coming, and they're going to flood the market for that. But there's still plenty of opportunity to sell it at local places and your farmers markets. Don't count those out. But yeah, I agree with you.
And the same thing's going to happen in cannabis at some point in time.
Yeah.
The massive pharmaceutical companies are setting back right now, just watching what's happening. And cigarette companies and these really large global companies are setting back watching. And right now, it's still considered an illegal product, a Schedule I product in the United States, a Schedule I drug. When that changes and the Fair Banking Act happens, then the big boys are going to step into cannabis. And so, we see it in other industries.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It's good for the industry that the big boys are going to be there, but there's always going to be the small niches, the small companies that are going to be different. And you take a look at, yes, there's the behemoths like Target and Walmart and Costco and things like that. But why do you think, small local shops, like we have Boise Co-op here in Boise, Idaho.
Sure.
They have 2 locations, and they are similar to Whole Foods, but they're local to the local area, and they have a great base of clientele, and that they're very unique in that. And I think that's what's unique about anything is everyone. That's what's great about America is capitalism is working. It's giving everyone opportunity to build a business that the big dogs are in or going to be in. And you just have to be smart in business and start talking to people, even like myself, who can help you strategize. And even Rich here with NutriFreeze is, hey, help you kind of guide you in maybe your long-term plan for a freeze drying business. Rich, I want to thank you for attending this video series. We're at the Freeze Dry Business Channel. We're really here to connect the freeze drying business industry with the tools and the resources needed to grow a sustainable business. A sustainable business is one that really works well with your lifestyle, both in work and in personal life. Just build it to something that maintains just the goals that you want to achieve. Thanks again for coming. Where can people find out more about your company? I know you said NutriFreeze and the CannaFreeze behind you, but where can people find out more about you?
Sure. You can always find us at Botanique, and of course, like CannaFreeze and NutriFreeze. On social, you can find us at CannaFreeze Dry and NutriFreeze Dry, Nutra with an I. So you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Well, thanks a lot. And yeah, and if you haven't subscribed already to the Freeze Dry Business channel, go ahead and hit subscribe. In the video description of this video, I'm going to include some links directly to the websites that Rich outlaid here, as well as some other information. So take a look at that and reach out to Rich if you're interested. So thanks a lot, Rich, for your time. And
You're
we'll
certainly
close
welcome.
out. Thank you.
Thank you.